Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire, or at least one of its armies. We're back with chapters 3 and 4 of Dust of Dreams, so we're still in book 1. And things are getting interesting. We had something of a reading and other stuff. Yeah, I guess this will be more of a shorter video. I hope so, because I just found out, like, literally on my way out on the balcony to record this, I found out that I have 90 unread emails, and I had 20 this morning, so I'm a bit apprehensive. And we'll see how all of that goes. Until then, I'll just, talk to you about Dust of Dreams, because that's easier. So yeah, let's do this. Now, that was disappointing. Actually, I took out another beer and when I was preparing for this, and I have no idea where I put it down, so it's somewhere down there in my flat, and I'll probably find it at some point tomorrow or tonight, and if I find it, I'll certainly give it the coup de grace, so to speak, but until then, I'll have to live with this. Anyway, cheers. All right, so damn loud birds. Anyway, so obviously, chapter 3 is the big reading and all the stuff around it. I feel there's a bunch of things interesting there that I found, maybe realized for the first time there, or maybe not. And I wanted to, point them out quickly. The first thing there is Tavor doesn't get a card. Now, this is kind of dubious because she doesn't get one, and later on, Fiddler holds up the card that's just chain. So maybe that's her card. I'm not quite sure about that, but I feel that it's important that she doesn't have a card. She's outside of the entire thing, because, like, all the roles are, you know, set in stone. Like, everyone gets their, like, firm role. Maybe except Fiddler, because he didn't get one. But apart from that, like, everyone has their fixed role, and some of them are more or less fraught. We'll see how all of that turns out. But the point is, Tavor is outside of the system, and this is important because it kind of leads into the other main thing that I found interesting about the reading, apart from all the dramatics and all that shit, which is fun to read, but not where I'm looking at this time around. And that is when we talk about how Pinocel and Ersto Hubor, like, burst into flames and lose their essence and stuff like that, and then later on, Male Bug speaks to Saren Paddock and says, like, they just sat too close to the fire, basically. And what that means is that we're talking about a system, or a war of systems. That would be, the system of the Holds on the one hand, the system of the Warrens and the associated deck of dragons with its houses on the other side. And that's sort of the war that we have. And this is the thing that I feel is important there, the system itself that imposes roles on everyone. That system itself has power. It has a lot of power. And this is something that we can take away from it, right? By which I mean systems of organization, hierarchies, all these things, they have power in itself. The inertia of systems is something that is not to be underestimated, and it leaves very little power to individuals to actually change or choose within that system, which is what we have in a lot of, like, human societies. We sit there and we're like, yeah, fuck it, I can't be someone else. It's basically impossible, or like almost impossible. So what we see in there, when we have the blazing power of the Warren system, the deck of dragons unleashed in Letheras, is that superior system, like, enforcing its rigidity. And it's a super rigid system, right? You have all these roles, they're super rigid, and it's enforcing its rigidity on the world. And this is something that I think is very important to keep in mind about the whole like idea of these wars, war of systems with the holds and elder gods on the one hand, and the younger gods and the warrens and the deck of dragons on the other side. It's a war of systems, and systems develop a life of their own, which is something that should give us pause because they are mindless. And would you like to be subordinate to a mindless system? Because I fucking don't. So yeah, this is sort of my first point that I wanted to talk about, is like that it's very much about the system and not exactly about the actual people within it, because what gets hinted at least by Bug, for example, is that even the gods can't really choose their roles within that system because the system chooses. So yeah, that's sort of the first thing I wanted to look at, and that's, I feel, sort of the main issue of chapter 3. Like a lot of the stuff around that is like, character development, where you see Bryce being linked to the Malazans. We see the errant doing dumb shit because, let's face it, that's what he always has done. But now he's getting angry. He's also willingly giving into the temptation and the addiction of like raw power or raw like violence. Apart from like, his like aspect before, that was more like a subtle nudge here and there, and then he realizes that actually being a violent son of a bitch really is addictive, and so he does that. So yeah, that's sort of what I found in chapter 4. Not chapter 4, chapter 3, that is. All right, now let's have us a look at stuff that's later on happening in chapter 4, and that will mostly be I mean, we go through a lot of like different places there. We have a This is sort of what happens within both chapters 3 and 4, is we get like foreshadowing and prophecies in a way. Like, in chapter 3 we have the card reading that Fiddler does, and we also have Sinter having her weird feeling that makes them ride faster to Letheras, and get in time to Bryce Benedict. Although almost in time, because obviously Ublalapang knocks out the errand before that. But that's sort of what happens in chapter 3. And in chapter 4, we have, on the other hand, Khaled. Is that her name? I feel dumb for not really knowing Khaled. Khaled, that's her. Yeah, the destrant of the Kachin Jamal. She does her. She's riding the spotted horse to also get like an insight. And I feel there's two things in there. Like, on the one hand, we have the super elaborate, like super exact description of how these like mind trips, how these divinatory like rituals work in a lot of like societies, with like taking these herbs and then going through that place, and how you build a narrative around those, which, like, what's basically illusions or visions that you get through drugs. And then later on we have the situation where everyone's favorite handless blind bastard Heboric, who is back, as we noticed at the beginning of the no, at the ending of the prologue, but he's really back now, at least in dreams of people. But when he explains it on like a more scientific level, he's like, basically after a while you get inured to those drugs, you get desensitized, and it becomes just a ritual that helps your mind to do that. So we have that like rather academic look at divinatory practices in a lot of societies. And then we also have obviously the level of the actual visions and the actual like foreshadowing or like prophecy kind of thing going on with Caliph as well. And now that we see her talking to Heboric, we kind of know that those paths will cross. And we're talking about the same kind of future, like a future that involves both the Kachin Jamal, or at least they're destined, and the Malazans, or at least some Malazans, and we'll still need to figure out what's going on there. I obviously know what Heboric is talking about when he's talking about her being spiked there, but her not being dead. And I'm not gonna say who it is, but I'm just gonna say, if you read older books, especially Deadhouse Gates, rather like attentively, you can guess who she is. But we'll see when that comes, when the time comes. I just wanted to, point out how we have both chapters dealing with prophecies and foreshadowing for the rest of the books, basically. All right. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is the Barghast. We are back with the white-faced Barghast. And there's one thing that I found really interesting, or not really interesting, but like telling and important. And that is when Kafal is talking to Setok, whom we know is that girl with the wolves from Reaper's Gale. But that's not so much the point there. But my point was when they were talking about a warrior society and war, and this is the important bit there. Once you have a warrior society, we see that mirrored also with the Kachin Jamal, and when Sak Churok is like seeing how eager his two other Kael hunters are to spill blood. The point is, if your society is a warrior society that worships, or at least values, bloodshed and violence and war, and makes that like a core component of its society, it means you need to go to war. It means your society will stay violent, because that's how you gain prestige within your society, right? And it's very, very difficult to get out of that warrior society into a more peaceful mode of life, because you need to actually change more than just the outer circumstances. Like when we, like a lot of, well, maybe that's a European thing. I don't know. Let me pull out my Western perspective here, or mostly my European perspective here, or whatever. The point is, with places like where I grew up, we don't have that warrior cult. Maybe it's also because I'm German and we really fucked up that warrior cult thing a couple of decades ago. But the point is, being a hyper-masculine fighter, a warrior, is not what makes you a very respected person in our society. But once you have a society where that warrior ethos is still there, where that warrior aspect is super important when it comes to societal success and stuff like that, it's very difficult to change that society to a different society, which means if you are, like the Barghast in this case, a warrior society, and let's face it, we've met Hitan before, it's an equal opportunity warrior society. This is not just a male role to be the warrior. It's totally open for women as well. Point is, though, you need war. You need to find an enemy. You are, as a society, a very belligerent bunch of people, because you need to have some kind of war going on, so your society and your younger generations can come and prove themselves. And what Tool, Almost Tulan, finds himself right now is that situation where he doesn't want war right now. He's not that warlike person. He's an Imas. He's an Imas. And the Imas are not a war, like, at least when you look at the Imas in the Refugium, they are not a warrior society. They're a hunter-gatherer society, but they're rather peaceful people, right? They don't go to war unless they have to. Although we can obviously discuss whether they really had to go to war against the Jackot or not, but that's not the point. But they basically, and this is sort of, I feel, the point, because we learned that the Barghast are sort of the inheritors of the descendants of the Imas. And what the Imas did is they turned themselves from a peaceful society into a warrior society, which is something that a lot of human societies have also done, right? So they turned themselves into this kind of warrior society. And we see what happens, because it basically meant the end of their civilization, because they, became Talana mass. But now we have their descendants, which are the Barghast, and the Barghast are still that warrior society, and they're struggling with coming back onto like a peacetime footing for a society and finding, other things that are valuable that can, lead to success within their society. So yeah, I guess the point that I was trying to make here is be careful about that warrior ethos. It can lead to all kinds of trouble. All right. What else did I have? I can tell you. The snake, the ribby snake, the children. Well, obviously it's super tragic, and we know that, but that's not what I want to look at today. What I wanted to look at today is Badal, her poems and her words, because this is sort of the thing. The ribby snake doesn't have food at this point. The children have no food. They have barely water and all of that. What they have, and we see that with that boy whose name I unfortunately forgot, who's taking up all Badal's words. Badal is the poet. Words are meaning, and words and meaning and poetry and all of that can keep us alive in a lot of like super severe circumstances. And I feel that's like the lesson that I personally took away from reading this small bit of the Ribby Snake today, is the fact that we aren't like, as a very materialistic society that we, at least in the West, live in today, we certainly undervalue, the power of words and the power of poetry, like how much those things, how much poetry, or like, I don't know if this goes beyond that, but like how much art and words can sustain us in the direst and the darkest of times and circumstances. Like I guess a lot of us have had that before. It's like you feel like this is obviously a much easier thing than what those children are going through in the snake there. But the point is, like, in our darkest hours, it's so often it's music or poetry or stories or novels or whatever. It's words. It's words, because I'm going to choose to call music words in this case, because either you have lyrics, but also it kind of follows the same kind of thing. It is that imagination. It's that imagination that keeps us alive, that keeps us going, that nourishes us through those really, really dark times, because it's food for the soul. And that's at least as important as food for the body. And like, both are obviously important. I'm not going to say anything else, but the point is, those can keep us going. And I feel that's sort of what we can take away from that situation with Sadik is his name. Sadik's doesn't have many words, but he eats up all the words that Badal gives him. That's his food for the day. And it's like something that we should be aware of, and it's something that, at least like for me, like, the Malazan Book of the Fallen does very much. It's like, these are the words that keep us alive, that keep us going, that are food for thought and food for like changing our lives and keeping us going. So there's that. All right, I feel that's sort of it for today. Sorry this is a rather short video, but also it looks like it's getting dark, and maybe those birds will actually shut up at some point. Anyway, tomorrow I have a long talk with Iskar Jarak for you, and we'll see what happens on Sunday. So until then, have a great Friday evening. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Until then, cheers.